A good question for our own personal reflection is, why do we have an imagination? And what is the proper use of our imagination? And when we ponder this question, do we stop to consider one of the fundamental truths about the human person, each and every one of us, that we are created in the image and the likeness of God. And so wouldn't it seem to follow that the reason why we have an imagination is because God has one? There is something terrific about fantasies and fairy tales. And I think sometimes we kind of get more caught up in the fantasy and the fairy tale and don't really perceive the substance that is behind the stories we know so well. We don't always pause to connect the dots and say, hey, do you know what this fairy tale reminds me of? Because they're not just bedtime stories. And you know the kind of fantasies and fairy tales I'm talking about. You know, you have the fairy tales about, the knight in shining armor who goes in pursuit to rescue the damsel in distress, to free her from the clutches of this monstrous dragon. Or you can have the handsome and very charming prince who with a kiss awakens a maiden, freeing her from the spell cast over her by a dark spirit. And we all know how these fantasies end, all of these fairy tales. The knight in shining armor and the damsel in distress, or the charming, handsome prince and the maiden, they get married. And they live happily ever after. And this doesn't sound familiar? Because one of the things, if you stop and think about it, let's cut through all of the fantastical imagery of the book of Revelation. And how does the book of Revelation conclude? With nuptial imagery, doesn't it? I saw a new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, adorned like a bride for her husband. And the two make their dwelling place on earth. And how does the book of Revelation conclude? With a new heavens and a new earth, the bride and her husband, now united, take up their dwelling in this new creation, and they live happily ever after. Because isn't it Jesus who really is that knight in shining armor? Isn't it Jesus who really is that charming and handsome prince who rescues his bride from the clutches of the monstrous dragon, who with a kiss of his mouth, which signifies his word, the proclamation of the gospel, awakens the maiden, his bride, which is the church, from her stupor the spell cast over her by a dark spirit. But having said that, and these are like terrific uses of the imagination. You look at fairy tales and these terrific fantasies. We certainly don't want to exclude Lord of the Rings. But you look at these things and you see how there is a current of Christian imagination that runs through them all. And it gives us this wonderful world into which we can escape. But escape in a way that reinforces our faith, reinforces our hope. That's what makes them so delightful. You can look. I was debating whether or not I want to mention it because I didn't want to rustle anyone's feathers, but, why not? There was a recent movie produced called Wicked. It was supposed to be a reimagining of The Wizard of Oz. Now, The Wizard of Oz, is not necessarily informed by Christianity, but it does present a good ethic, a good morality. There is something good and wholesome behind it, if you want to peel back the layers. But to come out with a reimagining of something that is so wholesome and then call it wicked. There's something very, very perverse going on. Because the gist of the movie is that what we've been told previously is not as it seems. That the Wicked Witch of the West is actually good, and Glinda, the good witch, is actually evil. And we kind of see that in our culture, so this shouldn't be a surprise. How we call things that are good evil, and we call things that are evil good. It's perverse. It's obscene. It's an abomination. That's a misuse of our imagination. But let's look at today's gospel. See how this all knits together. If it does, you decide. How many times did you hear the word glory in today's gospel reading? Over and over and over, right? Now is the Son of Man glorified, God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify in himself, and God will glorify him at once. That's a lot. How do you take all that in? Well, you kind of pause, take a deep breath, and what are we talking about? When we talk about glory, being glorified, glorification. And I think we come back, I proposed, a very simple definition for glory that I think in at least a certain extent encompasses all of its nuances. And if you were just simply to say something along the lines of, to publish one's fame or excellence. Isn't that what it really means to glorify someone? To tell someone else about their fame, about their excellence. You reveal something about who they are. And so let's look at glory today as being the revelation of who God is. And in that revelation, God publishes, he extols, he reveals, he makes known something of his own excellence. And how does he do that? In the most unexpected way, and in a way that we could call it the greatest of all paradoxes of the Christian faith. Because kind of consider the context. Let's go back into the Roman Empire. What was the glory of the Roman Empire? How was glory celebrated? You could use one example and say, well, think about one of the great Caesars, a great military man, or one of his generals. They come back from battle, and they enter the city of Rome with great pageantry. And in that pageantry, in his train, are all the conqueror's people who are brought into his submission. There's the booty, there's the tribute. This is a spectacle. And so when we apply that then to the person of Jesus Christ, here's where the paradox enters in. Because this is not how Jesus Christ reveals his glory. When Judas had left them, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified." How? Precisely in his passion, death, and resurrection. He didn't reveal his glory with great pageantry. That will come at the end of time, when he returns as a victorious and conquering king. But first things first, he reveals why he's victorious, how he conquers, but most importantly, what it is he reveals about himself. And so he takes an instrument of humiliation and shame. Humiliation and shame. The cross. And by being nailed to it, shows his love for us in the very sacrifice of his life. When we say God is love, the first thing that comes to our mind, our imagination, should be Christ crucified. Because that is the fullest, most distinct, most eloquent publication of his excellence, of his great love for the human race. But kind of circling back, every fairy tale ends with a kiss, doesn't it? It always ends with a kiss. When's the last time any of you have read the Song of Songs? When's the last time any of you have read the Song of Songs? The Song of Songs can be described, as a love poem sent to us by God. It's the dialogue between the bride and the bridegroom who are enamored with each other. But what's interesting about the Song of Songs is that it doesn't end with a kiss. It begins with one. And so the first line, let him kiss me with kisses of his mouth. And that can make an awful lot of people squirmish. Good. Good. But let's talk about what that means. What is the kiss? You know, the kiss is the Word of God. And the mouth is the soul of the human person. And so the person enamored with God is asking him to kiss me with kisses of your mouth, to impress your word deeply upon my soul. And awaken within me desire and love, that I may be utterly and completely enamored with you and you alone. The fathers of the church, approach it this way. Jesus likes to use the image of water quite a bit, and for good reason. Remember the woman at the well? He said, if you would ask me for water, I would have given you some. Not just any water, but a spring of water welling up within you, so that you will never be thirsty again. And in there we can kind of see a faint resonance of Christ asking for permission to kiss her soul with the kiss of his mouth, his word. We look at the Psalms. Oh God, for you I long, for you my soul is thirsting. Even my body pines for you, like a dry, weary land without water. And so the fathers of the church say, if you're thirsty, you have to go to the fountain. And when you're at the fountain, you have to touch your mouth to the source of water to quench your thirst. You know what the terrific news about all this is? It's not a fairy tale. This is reality. This is divinely revealed truth about who God is and who we are, created in his image and likeness. How deeply and how personally, he loves and prefers us to anything else he created. Wants nothing more than to unite us to himself. And so Jesus says, I give you a new commandment. New? I've read the Old Testament. Love your neighbor is all over the place. What's new about this one? Well, because Christ had not revealed the true nature of love as of yet, because he had not been sacrificed. He had not given his life as an offering for our sake. And so now he can call it new. Love one another as I have loved you. You see, now in that is how then we glorify God, that we publish, that we reveal, that we extol his excellence, most specifically, his love for us. It's not that complicated. We don't need to put on a big show. It's something as humble and as simple as the smallest act of kindness done for the love of God. And in that we make known God's love for them. But only we can do that. We have to do that. Love one another as I have loved you. And especially, right, in a world, that has lost its hope, that has become so corrupt, depraved, perverted, distorted. How many, we need a thesaurus up here to kind of exhaust all the ways we can describe how we have abandoned God's love for us and what the net result is. And so what it tells us, so if there is anything good, to come out of a film like, say, Wicked, it's that it can begin a conversation, right? It can begin a conversation that we can clarify in our own minds those things we value, those things we hold dear, those things in which we hope. And for the love of Jesus Christ, to make it our intention, to make it our effort, to make it our practice, to reveal and to show His love to others who are looking for some small sign, who are looking for some small sign that there is something for which we can hope.